"Who got you those flowers?" Donato Lombardo asked, his voice a low rumble that made the marble walls of his Sicilian office feel suddenly too close. He stood over my desk, his tattooed hand gripping the gold silk ribbon so tightly the delicate fabric began to fray. The card, cream-colored, expensive, handwritten, dangled from his fingers like evidence at a crime scene. "Thinking of you always." Hey, if you're enjoying this story, don't forget to hit that subscribe button, like the video, and comment where you're watching from. Your support helps us bring more powerful stories. And trust me, you won't want to miss them. Now, let's go back to hours before, where it all started. And I realized that Sicily's most feared syndicate boss wasn't asking out of casual curiosity. The way his knuckles had gone white around that innocent bouquet, the way his jaw clenched hard enough to shatter teeth, told me that Donato Lombardo was about to lose the iron control he'd maintained for 2 years, over flowers meant for his secretary. But I'm getting ahead of myself. To understand how a simple bouquet could detonate 2 years of careful professional distance, you need to understand the 3 rules that kept me alive in Donato Lombardo's world. Rules I'd created the day I walked into the Lombardo building for my interview and realized the marble floors were so polished because they needed to hide bloodstains efficiently. Rule 1. Don't look back. Ever. I learned this on my second day. A man in an expensive suit was escorted past my desk by 2 of Donato's soldiers, their hands firm on his shoulders. The man was crying, pleading in rapid Sicilian that echoed off the vaulted ceilings. My instinct was to turn, to watch, to understand what was happening. But Marco, the older security guard who'd taken pity on the naive new secretary, had leaned close and whispered, "Signorina Cora, in this building, you look forward. Only forward. What happens behind you is not your business, and knowing makes you a liability." So I kept my eyes on my computer screen, my fingers moving across the keyboard with practiced precision, even as I heard the elevator doors close on muffled sobs. I never saw that man again. I never asked what happened to him. And I never, ever looked back when I heard footsteps behind me that didn't belong to Donato. Rule 2. Perfect is survival. There is no room for error in Donato Lombardo's world. A misplaced comma in a contract could mean the difference between a successful negotiation and a territory war. A forgotten meeting could cost lives. An overheard phone conversation repeated to the wrong person could end careers, or worse. So I became perfect. I arrived at 7:30 every morning, a full hour before Donato, and I didn't leave until he did, which was often well past midnight. My high ponytail was always sleek, not a single dark strand out of place, pulled tight enough that it sometimes gave me headaches, but loose enough that I didn't look severe. My suits were sharp, tailored, professional, always in colors that wouldn't draw attention. Charcoal gray, navy, occasionally a muted burgundy when I was feeling daring. I wore minimal jewelry, a simple watch, small gold earrings, nothing that could be grabbed or used against me. My desk was immaculate. Contracts were organized by priority and date. 3 phones, each for different types of calls, business, family matters, and the red one that only rang when something had gone very, very wrong. I knew Donato's schedule better than he did. I knew how he took his espresso, double shot, no sugar, in the small ceramic cup from his grandmother's set. I knew which calls he'd take immediately, and which ones he'd let go to voicemail as a power move. I knew the names of every family member, every business associate, every rival who'd ever crossed the Lombardo threshold. I knew when he hadn't slept, when a deal had gone south, when violence was simmering just beneath his carefully controlled surface. I learned to read the tension in his shoulders, the way his jaw tightened before he made a decision that would change lives. I became indispensable not because I was the best at filing or typing, though I was, but because I understood the unspoken language of his world. Perfect was survival, and I was very good at surviving. Rule 3. No personal life within these walls. This was the most important rule, the one I guarded most fiercely. Whatever happened outside, the Lombardo building stayed outside. My small apartment in the old quarter of Palermo, with its terracotta pots of basil and its view of clotheslines strung between ancient buildings, that was mine. My occasional dinners with university friends who'd scattered across Europe and occasionally returned, those were mine. My morning walks through the market where vendors called out prices and the smell of fresh bread mixed with sea air, those were mine. Inside the building, I was Miss Trentino. Professional, untouchable, a cipher who executed orders with precision and never, ever gave anyone a reason to wonder about the woman beneath the perfectly pressed suits. It was exhausting. Some days I felt like I was holding my breath from the moment I stepped through the heavy bronze doors until I finally escaped back into the chaotic warmth of Palermo's streets. But it worked. For 2 years, it worked beautifully. I'd watched 3 other secretaries come and go before me. Sophia had lasted 4 months before she made the mistake of gossiping about Donato's private life to her boyfriend. She disappeared from the roster without explanation. Julia had lasted 6 months before she'd become romantically involved with one of the lower-level associates, creating a conflict of interest that Donato couldn't tolerate. She was reassigned to the shipping office in Catania, as far from Donato's inner circle as one could get while still technically working for the family. And Elena, poor Elena, had lasted only 2 months before the stress of knowing too much had broken her. I found her crying in the bathroom, mascara running down her face, whispering that she couldn't sleep anymore, couldn't stop seeing the faces of the men who'd visited Donato's office and never left the building. I'd learned from all of them. I'd built my iron code from their failures, from their very human mistakes of caring too much, knowing too much, being too much of a person in a world that demanded you be a function. And it had worked. For 2 years, I'd navigated the treacherous waters of being Donato Lombardo's secretary without a single misstep. I'd become a fixture in the building, as reliable and unremarkable as the marble columns that held up the vaulted ceilings. The soldiers nodded to me with respect. The family members knew my name. Even Donato's mother, the formidable Signora Lombardo who terrified men twice her size, had once told me I had the good sense to keep my mouth shut and my eyes forward. I thought I was safe. I thought my rules were unbreakable, that as long as I maintained my perfect facade, I could exist in Donato's world without being consumed by it. But then Alessandro Russo, sweet, oblivious Alessandro who I'd known during my university days in Milan, who'd recently moved back to Palermo to open an architecture firm, had sent flowers to my office. Beautiful flowers. Thoughtful flowers. Flowers that came with a card that said, "Thinking of you always," because Alessandro had always been romantic in that innocent, uncomplicated way that had no place in my current life. And just like that, 2 years of careful construction crumbled. Because I'd forgotten the most important truth about working for a man like Donato Lombardo. The rules that kept you safe could also trap you. And when a man who'd built an empire on control suddenly lost it, no amount of professional distance would protect you from the fallout. The flowers had arrived at 3:15 on a Thursday afternoon, delivered by a nervous courier who'd practically sprinted away after I'd signed for them. I should have thrown them away immediately. I should have recognized them for what they were. A breach in my carefully maintained walls, a crack in my armor, a bright, beautiful declaration that I existed as more than just the Don's secretary. But I've been tired. 2 years of holding my breath will do that to you. And they were so lovely, those red roses and white lilies with their gold-dusted breath, so achingly normal in a world where nothing was normal. So I let myself smile. I'd adjusted the car between the blooms. I'd allowed myself 30 seconds of being just Cora, a woman who had friends who sent her flowers, who existed outside of contracts and coded phone calls and the weight of secrets that could kill. 30 seconds. That's all it took for Donato's office door to open and for my entire carefully constructed world to shift on its axis. Because when I looked up and saw him standing there, perfectly still in his charcoal suit with his dark eyes locked on the bouquet, I realized with sudden, terrible clarity that my rules had never protected me from him. They'd only delayed the inevitable moment when Sicily's most dangerous man would stop pretending he saw me as just his secretary and start demanding answers to questions I wasn't ready to face. "Who got you those flowers?" he asked, and I knew that nothing would ever be the same again. "An old friend," I'd answered, keeping my voice steady despite the way my heart hammered against my ribs. "Alessandro Russo. We went to university together." Donato had said nothing. Absolutely nothing. He'd simply looked at me with those dark, unreadable eyes for what felt like an eternity, then placed the card back on my desk with deliberate care, turned on his heel, and walked back into his office. The door closed with a soft click that somehow felt more ominous than if he'd slammed it. That had been Thursday afternoon. By Thursday evening, When I'd finally left the building at 11:45, Donato still hadn't called me into his office. Hadn't asked for a single file. Hadn't buzzed the intercom that usually punctuated my days with requests and commands. The silence from his office was absolute, and somehow that was worse than any confrontation could have been. Friday morning, I'd arrived at 7:30 as always, my ponytail perfect, my navy suit pressed, my face a mask of professional composure. The flowers were gone from my desk. I hadn't removed them, which meant Donato had, or he'd ordered someone to, and I couldn't decide which option unsettled me more. He'd emerged from his office at 9, looking as immaculate as ever in a black suit that probably cost more than my monthly rent. He nodded to me once, a brief acknowledgement of my existence, and then left the building without a word. No instructions, no schedule review, no indication of when he'd return. That's when I'd started to notice the car. It was parked across the street when I'd gone out for my lunch break, a black SUV with tinted windows that were just a shade too dark to be legal. I'd seen dozens of similar vehicles in the Lombardo fleet, but something about this one made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. It didn't move when I walked to the small cafe 3 blocks away where I usually grab a panino. It was still there when I returned 40 minutes later. Friday evening, Donato returned to the office at 6. He nodded to me again, that same brief, impersonal acknowledgement, and disappeared back into his office. At 8, his intercom finally buzzed. "Miss Trentino, you can go home. I won't need anything else tonight." His voice had been perfectly professional, perfectly controlled, perfectly wrong. I gathered my things, my hands steady through sheer force of will, and left. The black SUV was idling at the corner when I exited the building. It followed me home, maintaining a careful distance of about half a block, never close enough to be threatening, but never far enough for me to pretend I didn't notice. Saturday morning, I woke to find it parked outside my apartment building. This was new territory. In 2 years, Donato had never had me followed. Or if he had, I'd never been aware of it. The soldiers who provided security for the building were always visible, always professional, but this felt different, personal, like he was making sure I knew I was being watched. I planned to spend Saturday running errands. The market for fresh vegetables, the small bookshop near the cathedral where I'd been meaning to pick up a novel, maybe a walk along the waterfront if the weather held. Normal things. Things that belonged to Cora Trentino the person, not Miss Trentino the secretary. But the SUV followed me to every single stop. At the market, I'd pick through tomatoes while pretending not to see the vehicle parked at the corner, its engine running. The vendor, Signora Russo, no relation to Alessandro, had tried to chat with me about her daughter's upcoming wedding, but I'd barely heard her. My attention was split between selecting basil and tracking the dark shape in my peripheral vision. At the bookshop, I'd browse the shelves for 20 minutes, my fingers trailing over spines without really seeing titles. Through the window, I could see the SUV, waiting, always waiting. The elderly owner had asked if I was looking for anything specific, and I'd mumbled something about contemporary fiction before buying the first book my hand landed on, without even reading the synopsis. By the time I reached the waterfront, my careful composure was cracking. The sun was bright, the Mediterranean stretching out in shades of turquoise and sapphire that usually soothed something deep in my chest. Families walked past with gelato, tourists took photos, couples strolled hand in hand. Normal life, happening all around me, while I sat on a bench and felt the weight of surveillance pressing down on my shoulders. The SUV was parked 50 meters away, close enough that I could see the outline of at least 2 figures in the front seats, far enough that no one else would think twice about it. I pulled out my phone, Alessandro's last message still sitting in my inbox. "Can't wait to see you tonight. I'll pick you up at 7. Tonight. Dinner." I'd agreed to it on Wednesday, before the flowers, before everything had shifted. Alessandro wanted to catch up, to tell me about his new firm, to reminisce about our university days when life had been simpler and the most dangerous thing I'd faced was a difficult exam. I should cancel. Every instinct I'd honed over 2 years screamed at me to cancel, to text Alessandro some polite excuse, to eliminate this complication before it became a problem. But something stubborn and reckless had taken root in my chest, something that resented being followed, being watched, being treated like a possession instead of a person. I was going to dinner. I was going to have a normal evening with an old friend. And if Donato Lombardo had a problem with that, He could use his words instead of his surveillance team. I texted Alessandro back. 7 works perfectly. Looking forward to it. The SUV didn't move. Saturday evening, I spent longer than usual getting ready. I told myself it was because I want to look nice for dinner, not because some petty part of me wanted Donato to see exactly what he was missing by maintaining his silent treatment. I chose a dress I rarely wore, deep emerald green that brought out the gold undertones of my olive skin, fitted but tasteful, the hem falling just above my knee. I left my hair down for once, dark waves falling past my shoulders, so different from the severe ponytail that had become my armor. When Alessandro texted that he was outside, I grabbed my clutch and headed downstairs. The black SUV was still there, parked across the street. I didn't look at it directly, but I felt it. Felt the weight of eyes watching as I slid into Alessandro's modest sedan. Felt the attention, like a physical touch, as we pulled away from the curb. And felt, with absolute certainty, the SUV began to follow us through the narrow streets of Palermo. Alessandro was talking, something about his new office space and the challenges of finding skilled craftsmen in the city, but I barely heard him. My attention was fixed on the rearview mirror, where the black vehicle maintained its careful distance, a shadow that refused to fade even as the sun set over the terracotta rooftops and the city transformed into a maze of golden light and dark corners. Cora, Alessandro's voice broke from my distraction. Are you okay? You seem a million miles away. I forced a smile, turning to face him. Sweet Alessandro, with his easy grin and his uncomplicated life. He had no idea what he'd stepped into by sending those flowers. No idea that this simple dinner had become a move in a game far more dangerous than he could imagine. I'm fine. I lied smoothly, years of practice making the words sound genuine. Just tired from work. Tell me more about the restoration project. As Alessandro launched back into his explanation, I caught movement in the side mirror. The SUV was still there. Always there. A silent, looming reminder that Donato Lombardo's control extended far beyond the marble walls of his office. And, as we pulled up to the restaurant, a small, elegant place tucked into a side street near the harbor, I saw it park half a block away. Close enough to watch the entrance. Close enough to see exactly who walked in and who walked out. The message was clear. Donato might be silent, but he was paying attention. And this dinner, this small act of defiance, would have consequences I wasn't sure I was ready to face. The restaurant was called Il Gabbiano, a small family-owned establishment that had been serving fresh seafood to locals for 3 generations. Alessandro held the door open for me, his hand briefly touching the small of my back as I passed through, a gesture so innocent and automatic that I barely registered it. But someone else did. I felt at the moment I stepped inside, that prickling awareness that had become second nature after 2 years in Donato's world. The dining room was intimate, maybe 15 tables covered in white linen, candles flickering in small glass holders, the scent of garlic and lemon and the sea. Most tables were occupied by couples and families, the warm buzz of conversation and clinking silverware creating a cocoon of normalcy. And in the corner, partially obscured by a stone column, sat Donato Lombardo. He wasn't hiding. That would have been beneath him. He was simply there, occupying a small table near the back, a crystal tumbler of what looked like whiskey sitting untouched in front of him. He wore a black shirt, the sleeves rolled up to his elbows in a way I'd never seen in the office, revealing the full extent of the tattoos that covered his forearms. Intricate designs that told stories in ink, symbols of power and family and violence rendered in shades of black and gray. Our eyes met across the dim restaurant, and something hot and dangerous flashed in his gaze before his expression smoothed into perfect neutrality. He lifted his glass in a small, mocking salute, then took a slow sip, never breaking eye contact. My breath caught. This was deliberate, provocative, a statement that whatever boundaries I thought existed between my professional life and personal life were illusions he could shatter whenever he chose. Cora, Alessandro's voice pulled my attention back. He was smiling at me, oblivious to the undercurrent of tension that had just electrified the room. Table for 2. The hostess, a woman in her 50s with kind eyes, nodded and led us to a table near the window. It offered a lovely view of the harbor, boats bobbing gently in the evening light. It also offered a direct sight line to Donato's corner table. I sat with my back to him, a small act of defiance that felt both brave and foolish. If I couldn't see him, maybe I could pretend he wasn't there. Maybe I could salvage this evening and enjoy a simple dinner with an old friend without feeling like every word, every gesture, every smile was being cataloged and judged. Alessandro was talking about Milan, about the architecture professors we both loved, and the late nights in the studio building models and drinking terrible coffee. He was easy to talk to, always had been, with his open face and genuine enthusiasm for his work. There was no hidden agenda with Alessandro, no coded language or dangerous subtext. He was exactly what he appeared to be. I was so happy when I heard you'd moved back to Sicily, he said, reaching across the table to briefly squeeze my hand, a friendly gesture between old classmates. I've missed having someone who actually understands the difference between Romanesque and Gothic architecture. I smiled, trying to focus on him, on this moment, on the normalcy of it all. I miss Milan sometimes. The energy of the city, the art scene. But you're happy here? In Palermo. There was genuine curiosity in his question, no judgment. Was I happy? The question itself felt absurd. Happiness wasn't something I considered in 2 years. Survival, competence, security, those are the measures by which I evaluated my life. But happiness, it's complicated, I said finally, accepting the wine list from the server. That's when I heard it, a sharp crack, like ice breaking, followed by the subtle sound of liquid hitting wood. Several diners turned, searching for the source of the noise. I didn't need to turn. I knew exactly what had happened. The server near Donato's table moved quickly, professionally, murmuring apologies as she dabbed at what I could only assume was whiskey spreading across his table. I risked a glance over my shoulder and immediately wished I hadn't. Donato was staring at our table, at the space where Alessandro's hand had briefly covered mine. His own hand was still wrapped around what remained of his whiskey glass. The crystal fractured into a spiderweb of cracks. Blood welled up between his fingers, dark against his olive skin, but he didn't seem to notice or care. His jaw was locked, a muscle ticking in his cheek, and his eyes were blazing with something raw and barely controlled. Our gazes collided again, and this time there was no neutrality, no careful mask. This was Donato stripped of his legendary control, and what I saw there made my pulse spike with something that was equal parts fear and recognition. Possessiveness, rage, want. Cora. Alessandro followed my gaze, finally noticing the commotion in the corner. Is everything okay over there? That guy looks intense. I turned back to Alessandro, forcing my voice to remain steady. I'm sure it's fine. What were you saying about the restoration project? But my hands were trembling slightly as I picked up my water glass. Across the restaurant, I could hear the server insisting that Donato needed medical attention for his hand, and his low, controlled voice responding in Sicilian, declining her help. The words were too quiet for me to make out, but the tone was unmistakable. He was staying. He was watching, and he wanted me to know it. Dinner became a surreal exercise in divided attention. Alessandro talked about his projects, his hopes for establishing his firm, his excitement about reconnecting with old friends. I responded appropriately, asked the right questions, laughed at the right moments. But every fiber of my being was attuned to the man in the corner. I felt when he ordered another drink, the server approaching his table with visible nervousness. Felt when his attention sharpened every time Alessandro leaned forward in conversation. Felt the weight of his stare like a physical touch every time I smiled or laughed. When our entrees arrived, I couldn't taste the food. The branzino, cooked perfectly with herbs and lemon, might as well have been cardboard. Alessandro was telling a story about a disastrous client meeting, animated and funny, and I was nodding along while my mind raced through the implications of Donato's presence. This wasn't about the flowers anymore. This was about territory, about power, about a line I crossed without fully understanding the stakes. By coming here, by sitting across from Alessandro while Donato watched, I'd escalated something that had been simmering beneath the surface for 2 years. So I told him, Alessandro was saying, gesturing with his fork, that if he wanted Byzantine revival, he needed to actually look at Byzantine architecture, not just Pinterest boards. He laughed at his own story, and I managed to smile, but then I felt it, a presence behind me, a shift in the air that made every survival instinct I'd honed scream in warning. Signorina Trentino. Donato's voice was quiet, controlled, but I could hear the edge beneath it, sharp as broken glass. I turned slowly, my heart hammering, and found him standing beside our table. Up close, I could see the blood on his hand, the way he'd wrapped a cloth napkin around his palm, the dark stains spreading across the white fabric. His tattoos seemed darker somehow in the candlelight, more menacing, the intricate designs moving with the flex of his muscles. "Mr. Lombardo," I said, my voice admirably steady. "What a surprise." His lips curved into something that wasn't quite a smile. "Is it?" His gaze flicked to Alessandro, assessing him in a single glance that somehow managed to be both dismissive and threatening. "I don't believe we've met." Alessandro stood, extending his hand with the easy confidence of someone who had no idea he was shaking hands with a man who could make him disappear. "Alessandro Russo. I'm an old friend of Cora's from university." Donato looked at Alessandro's outstretched hand for a long moment before taking it with his uninjured one. The handshake was brief, but I saw the way Donato's grip tightened, saw Alessandro's polite smile falter slightly. "The one who sent the flowers," Donato said, and it wasn't a question. "Guilty," Alessandro replied with a laugh, completely missing the danger in Donato's tone. "I wanted to welcome myself back to Palermo and remind Cora that she has friends outside of work. She's always been terrible about keeping in touch." "Has she?" Donato's attention swung back to me, and I felt pinned by the intensity of his gaze. "Miss Trentino is very dedicated to her work. Sometimes I worry she forgets there's a world outside the office." The irony of hearing that from him, from a man who'd had me followed all weekend, who was currently bleeding onto our table while radiating barely suppressed violence, would have been funny if I weren't so acutely aware of how quickly this situation could turn dangerous. "I should get back to my table," Donato said, his tone suddenly pleasant, almost friendly, but his eyes, fixed on mine, told a different story. "Enjoy your dinner, Signorina Trentino. I'll see you Monday morning, 7:30, as always." The reminder of Monday, of returning to the office, of the consequences waiting for me there, hung in the air like a threat. Then he turned and walked back to his corner table, his movements controlled and predatory, leaving a trail of tension in his wake. Alessandro sat back down, his expression slightly confused. "That was your boss?" "Yes," I managed, watching as Donato signaled for his check. "He seems very protective of you." I looked at Alessandro, sweet oblivious Alessandro, and wondered how to explain that what he'd just witnessed wasn't protection. It was possession, and Monday morning, I would pay the price for every moment of this dinner. Monday morning arrived with the kind of crystalline clarity that made Palermo look like a postcard. I stood outside the Lombardo building at 7:15, 15 minutes earlier than usual, staring at the bronze doors like they were the entrance to a battlefield. My ponytail was flawless. My charcoal suit was pressed to perfection. My face betrayed nothing, but my hands, hidden in the pockets of my jacket, were trembling. I'd spent Sunday oscillating between defiance and dread, replaying Saturday night in my mind until every moment was burned into my memory. The way Donato had looked at Alessandro, the blood seeping through the napkin wrapped around his hand, the barely controlled violence simmering beneath his polite words, the promise implicit in, "I'll see you Monday morning." At 7:25, I finally walked through those bronze doors. The building was quiet. Most staff wouldn't arrive for another hour. My heels clicked against the marble floors as I rode the elevator to the executive level, each floor passing with agonizing slowness. When the doors opened, I stepped out into the familiar space that suddenly felt foreign, charged with anticipation. Donato's office door was closed. No light showed beneath it. For a moment, I allowed myself to hope that he was running late, that I'd have time to settle in, to reconstruct my armor before facing him. Then I heard his voice behind me. "Miss Trentino." I turned slowly. He was standing in the doorway of the archives room, a space at the end of the hall where we kept physical copies of contracts and family records dating back decades. He was dressed in a navy suit, 3 pieces always, but something about his posture was different. Tense, coiled, like a wire pulled too tight. "Mr. Lombardo," I said, proud of how steady my voice sounded. "I wasn't expecting you to be here so early. I haven't left." The admission hung between us, heavy with implication. His eyes were shadowed, exhaustion visible in the set of his shoulders despite his immaculate appearance. I need you to pull the Marchetti contracts. All of them. They should be in the archives. It was a reasonable request. Perfectly professional. Except for the way he was looking at me, like I was prey, and he was deciding whether to pounce or wait. Of course, I said, moving toward the archives room. I'll bring them to your desk as soon as I've gathered them. I'll help you. He stepped aside to let me pass, and I caught the scent of his cologne mixed with whiskey and something darker. Some of the files are on the higher shelves. The archives room was long and narrow, lined on both sides with floor-to-ceiling shelves. A single window at the far end let in morning light that turned the dust motes into tiny diamonds. The door closed behind us with a soft click that sounded deafening in the silence. I moved to the M section, running my fingers along the labeled boxes, hyper-aware of Donato standing behind me. Not close enough to touch, but close enough that I could feel the heat radiating from him, could hear his controlled breathing. Here, I said, pulling down the first box. The Marchetti files from 2023. There should be 2 more boxes from the previous years. I reached for the next shelf, and that's when I felt him move. Not toward me, but to the door. I heard the lock turn, the metallic snick impossibly loud. My heart kicked against my ribs as I turned to face him. Mr. Lombardo, what are you doing? He leaned against the door, his hand still on the lock, and for the first time since I'd known him, Donato Lombardo looked unraveled. His tie was loosened slightly, the first button of his shirt undone. His hair, usually perfectly styled, looked like he'd been running his hands through it. And his eyes, God, his eyes were wild with something that made my breath catch. What am I doing? He laughed, a short, bitter sound. I'm trying not to lose my mind, Cora. I'm failing, but I'm trying. He'd used my first name, in the office. The boundary we'd maintained so carefully for 2 years, shattered with a single word. I don't understand, I said, even though I did. I understood perfectly, and that terrified me more than any threat ever could. Don't you? He pushed off from the door, and suddenly he was moving toward me, shrugging out of his suit jacket with jerky, frustrated movements and tossing it over a nearby filing box. His vest followed, discarded with the same careless intensity. The white dress shirt beneath stretched across his shoulders as he rolled up his sleeves, revealing those tattoos again, the symbols of everything he was. Then let me make it very clear. He stopped a foot away from me, close enough that I had to tilt my head back to maintain eye contact, close enough that I could see the fine lines of exhaustion around his eyes, the tension in his jaw, the pulse beating rapidly at his throat. I haven't slept in 3 nights, he said, his voice low and rough. 3 nights, Cora. Do you know why? I couldn't answer. My voice had abandoned me entirely, because every time I close my eyes, I see him touching you. His hand came up, hovering near my arm, but not quite making contact, like he was afraid of what would happen if he actually touched me. That innocent little hand squeeze at the table. His hand on your back when you walked into the restaurant. The way he looked at you like he had any right to look at you at all. Alessandro is just a friend. I managed, my voice barely a whisper. I don't care. The words came out harsh, almost violent. I don't care if he's just a friend, or a long-lost relative, or a complete stranger. I don't care about his intentions, or your explanations, or any of it. All I care about is that he touched you, and it's been driving me insane. He finally made contact, his hand cupping my jaw with surprising gentleness that contrasted sharply with the intensity in his voice. His thumb traced my cheekbone, and I felt myself trembling under his touch. I sat in that restaurant for 2 hours, he continued, his accent thickening with emotion, watching you smile at him, watching you laugh, watching you be relaxed and open in a way you never are with me. And I want to kill him. Actually kill him, Cora. I had my hand on my phone, ready to make a call that would have ended his life, and the only thing that stopped me was knowing it would hurt you. Donato. I breathed, using his first name for the first time ever, and something in his expression cracked. I crushed that glass in my hand and didn't even feel it, he said, his other hand coming up to frame my face, holding me like I was something precious and breakable. All I could feel was rage and jealousy and this absolutely consuming need to make sure everyone knows you're mine. I'm not yours, I said, but the words lacked conviction, especially when I was leaning into his touch despite every survival instinct screaming at me to run. aren't you?" His forehead dropped to rest against mine, his breath warm against my lips. "Then explain to me why I've been half in love with you since you corrected my grammar in front of the entire family council. Explain why I've spent 2 years maintaining professional distance when all I wanted was to pull you into my office and kiss you until you forgot every rule you made to keep me at arm's length." "This is crazy," I whispered, but my hands had come up to grip his shirt, holding him close instead of pushing him away. "Yes," he agreed, his lips brushing my temple. "It is. I'm the most powerful man in Sicily, Cora. I control territories, influence politicians, command the loyalty of hundreds of men. But I can't control this. Can't control what I feel for you. Can't control the way my heart stops every time you walk into a room. Can't control the rage that consumes me at the thought of anyone else having what should be mine. You had me followed all weekend," I said, trying to hold on to my anger, my sense of violation, anything that would help me resist the pull I felt toward him. "I know." He didn't sound apologetic. "I needed to know you were safe. Needed to know where you were, who you were with, that no one was taking advantage of the fact that you're important to me. The surveillance was as much for your protection as my sanity. That's not normal, Donato. Nothing about us is normal." His hand slid to the back of my neck, his fingers tangling in my hair, tugging gently until my ponytail loosened. "I'm a criminal, Cora. A mafia boss. My world is built on violence and control and power. But with you, I have none. With you, I'm just a man who hasn't slept because he can't stop thinking about another man touching what he wants more than his next breath. This crosses every line," I said, even as I felt my carefully constructed walls crumbling. "Every rule I made to survive in your world." "Then maybe," he murmured, his lips hovering just above mine, "it's time to make new rules. Rules where I'm allowed to want you, where you're allowed to want me back, where we stop pretending that 2 years of dancing around this tension hasn't been slowly killing us both. And if I say no, I had to ask, had to know if I still had a choice in this. Then I'll step back." His hands loosened slightly, giving me room even as his eyes pleaded with me to stay. "I'll maintain distance. I'll suffer in silence. I'll watch you smile at other men and die a little more each time. But I needed you to know, Cora. I needed you to understand that what happened Saturday wasn't about flowers or professional boundaries. It was about me losing the battle I've been fighting since the day you walked into my life and changed everything." The silence stretched between us, heavy with possibility and danger and 2 years of denied desire. My mind screamed at me to run, to restore the boundaries, to save myself from the complications of falling for a man whose world could consume me. But my heart, my traitorous heart, was already lost. I kissed him, or he kissed me. In the end, it didn't matter who closed the distance first, only that the space between us disappeared and his mouth was on mine, demanding and desperate and 2 years in the making. His hands tangled in my hair, ruining my perfect ponytail, and I didn't care. I didn't care about anything except the way he tasted like whiskey and mint, the way his body pressed against mine, solid and warm and real. When we finally broke apart, both breathing hard, he rested his forehead against mine and whispered, "Mine." And fool that I was, I didn't argue. That was Monday. By Tuesday afternoon, I was questioning every decision that had led me to that archives room. She arrived at 2 o'clock, escorted by Marco, who looked apologetic in a way that made my stomach drop. She was stunning in that effortless way some women manage, tall and willowy with honey-colored hair that fell in perfect waves past her shoulders. Her dress was designer, cream-colored and fitted, professional but somehow sensual. She moved with the kind of confidence that came from always being the most beautiful woman in any room. "Signorina Trentino," Marco said, his discomfort obvious. "This is Signorina Valentina Greco. She'll be working with you for the next few weeks. Working with me, not for the family in some other capacity, not in another department. With me." Valentina smiled, extending a perfectly manicured hand. "It's lovely to meet you. Donato speaks so highly of your organizational skills." "Donato, not Mr. Lombardo, not the Don. Donato." I shook her hand, my professional mask sliding into place, even as something cold and sharp twisted in my chest. "Welcome to the team, Signorina Greco. I wasn't aware we'd be bringing on additional support." "Last-minute decision," she said breezily, already moving to examine my desk with the kind of easy familiarity that suggested this wasn't her first time in the building. Donato thought you might appreciate the help. He mentioned you've been working late hours. There was again. Donato. Like they were familiar. Like she had access to information about my schedule, my workload, my life. How thoughtful of Mr. Lombardo, I said, each word carefully measured. Did he mention what specifically you'd be assisting with? Oh, everything really. Valentina picked up one of the files from my desk, flipping through it with casual interest. Calendar management, correspondence, meeting preparation. Donato wants to make sure you're not overwhelmed. Before I could respond, his office door opened. Donato emerged looking immaculate in a charcoal suit, his expression perfectly neutral. But I saw it, that flicker in his eyes when his gaze moved between Valentina and me. Assessment. Calculation. Something that made me realize this wasn't about helping me at all. Signorina Greco, he said, his voice smooth and professional. I trust Marco got you settled. Yes, thank you. Valentina turned to him with a smile that was just a shade too warm. Cora has been very welcoming. Cora. She was using my first name like we were colleagues, like we had any kind of relationship at all. Excellent. Donato's attention shifted to me, and I saw the challenge there, subtle but unmistakable. Miss Trentino, I'll need you to show Signorina Greco the filing system. She'll be handling some of the contractor correspondence going forward. My contractor correspondence. The work I perfected over 2 years, the system I'd built from scratch. Of course, Mr. Lombardo, I said, my tone as neutral as his. Two could play this game. Over the next hour, I showed Valentina the basics while fighting the urge to throw something. She was competent, I'd give her that, picking up the system quickly. She was also tactile, touching my arm when asking questions, leaning close to examine my computer screen, laughing at observations that weren't particularly funny. And Donato watched. Every time I glanced toward his office, I caught him looking, not at his computer, not at the documents on his desk, at us, at me, gauging my reaction like a scientist conducting an experiment. By Wednesday, Valentina had made herself indispensable. She arrived before me somehow, despite my 7:30 routine, already brewing espresso and organizing files. She knew how Donato took his coffee. She knew which calls he preferred to take in the morning versus afternoon. She anticipated his needs with an ease that had taken me months to develop. You're so lucky to work with him, she said Wednesday afternoon, perched on the edge of my desk while I tried to focus on a contract review. Donato is fascinating. All that power, that intensity. Don't you find it intoxicating? I looked up from my work, meeting her eyes. They were green, bright, and assessing. Mr. Lombardo is my employer, Signorina Greco. I find him professional. She laughed, a light, musical sound. So formal. He told me you were dedicated. I can see why he values you. Did he? It wasn't a question. Oh yes. He talks about you quite a bit actually. She examined her nails. The picture of casual interest. Your attention to detail. Your discretion. How you become essential to his operations. Something hot and ugly was building in my chest, spreading through my veins like poison. I recognized it intellectually, had felt echoes of it watching other women interact with Donato at family gatherings and business dinners. But I'd never experienced it with this kind of consuming intensity. Jealousy. I was jealous. Furiously, irrationally jealous of this woman who appeared from nowhere and inserted herself into the space I'd occupied for 2 years. Who spoke Donato's name with familiar ease. Who made espresso and smiled at him with that perfect face and probably hadn't spent years building walls just to have them shattered in an archives room. Thursday morning, I arrived at 7 to find Donato's office door already open and Valentina inside, laughing at something he'd said. She was leaning against his desk, close enough to touch, and he was smiling at her with that rare, genuine expression he usually reserved for family. Something inside me cracked. I set my bag down with more force than necessary, the sound sharp in the quiet office. They both looked up, and I saw it flash across Donato's face. Satisfaction. He'd gotten exactly what he wanted. Good morning, Miss Trentino, he said, his tone perfectly professional. Signorina Greco was just telling me about her previous position with the Castellano family. The Castellano family, one of the most powerful syndicates in Rome. So she wasn't just some random hire. She had pedigree, connections, experience in this world. Fascinating. I said flatly. Mr. Lombardo, the contracts you requested are on your desk. I'll be in the archives if you need anything. Signorina Greco can handle your calls this morning. I turned before he could respond, before I did something foolish like cry or scream or demand to know what game he was playing. The archives room, scene of Monday's confession, felt like the only safe space left. I've been there maybe 10 minutes, furiously reorganizing boxes that didn't need reorganizing when the door opened. I didn't need to turn around and know who it was. I felt him the way I always did, that electric awareness that made my skin hum. You can't hide in here all day, Donato said quietly. I'm not hiding. I snapped, still not turning. I'm working. Or, am I no longer needed since you've brought in my replacement? Replacement? There was amusement in his voice, which only made the anger burn hotter. Is that what you think this is? What else would I think? I whirled to face him. You bring in this beautiful, experienced woman who knows everything about your world, who calls you by your first name, who makes you smile. What am I supposed to think, Donato? He was leaning against the closed door, arms crossed, watching me with dark, intense eyes. And then, slowly, deliberately, he smiled. Not the professional smile he gave business associates or the cold smile he gave enemies. This was something else entirely. Pleased, triumphant. You're jealous, he said, like he'd just solved a complex equation. I'm not jealous. I lied, even as my face heated with the blatant untruth. You are. He pushed off the door, moving toward me with that predatory grace. You're burning with it. I can see it in your eyes, in the way you've been slamming things around all morning. You're feeling exactly what I felt watching that bastard touch you at dinner. The realization hit me like cold water. This was a test. Not a test. He stopped in front of me, his hand coming up to cup my jaw. A demonstration. I needed you to understand what you put me through. How it felt to watch someone else have access to you. To make you smile. To occupy space in your life that I wanted for myself. Valentina, I said, and it came out more accusation than question, is my cousin. He finished, his thumb stroking my cheek. Second cousin, technically, from the Greco branch in Naples. She owes me a favor. Agree to play this role for a few days. She finds the whole thing hilarious, by the way. Relief and rage wore to my chest. You manipulated me. Yes. He didn't deny it, didn't apologize. I wanted you to feel what I felt. I wanted you to understand that this thing between us isn't one-sided, that you care enough to burn when you think someone else has what you want. That's twisted. I know. His forehead touched mine, his breath warm against my lips. I'm a criminal, Cora. I play dirty. I manipulate. I scheme. But I need you to be sure, to be absolutely certain that you want this, want me, enough to feel that fire when you think you might lose it. And if I'd walked away, I demanded, even as my hands fisted in his shirt, if I just accepted Valentina as my replacement and moved on, then I would have known I was wrong about us. His other hand slid to my waist, pulling me closer. That Monday was a mistake. That what I feel isn't matched by what you feel. But you didn't walk away, did you? You're here, jealous and furious and beautiful, and that tells me everything I need to know. I wanted to stay angry, wanted to push him away and lecture him about trust and manipulation and healthy relationships. But his mouth was on mine again, and I was kissing him back with all the jealousy and frustration and want that had been consuming me for 3 days. My hands tangled in his hair, pulling him closer, harder, punishing him and myself and Valentina's imaginary claims on him all at once. When we broke apart, both breathing hard, I glared at him. She's gone by tomorrow. She leaves tonight, he promised. Her plane is already booked. Good. I kissed him again, softer this time, because if you ever pull something like this again, I'll quit and let you drown in disorganized files. He laughed against my mouth, the sound warm and genuine. Noted, cara mia. No more tests. No more tests, I agreed. From either of us. That evening, Donato insisted I accompany him to his villa for dinner. Not a request, not even really an invitation. Just a quiet statement that I would be joining him, and the assumption that I wouldn't refuse. I should have refused. Should have gone back to my small apartment and processed everything that had happened over the past week. The flowers, the surveillance, the confession, the kiss, the jealousy test. But I found myself in his car anyway, watching Palermo slide past the tinted windows as we drove into the hills where the old families kept their estates. The Lombardo villa was everything I'd imagined and nothing I was prepared for. Stone walls covered in climbing jasmine, a courtyard with a fountain that had probably been there for centuries, views of the city and sea that made my chest ache with their beauty. This was old money, old power, the kind of legacy that stretched back generations. Valentina was waiting in the main salon, changed into casual clothes, her designer dress replaced with jeans and a silk blouse. She looked up from her phone when we entered, her expression shifting to something almost apologetic. "I'm sorry," she said immediately, standing. "Donato told me you figured it out. I didn't mean to cause you genuine distress." "You played your role well," I said, because what else could I say? That I'd wanted to scratch her eyes out? That I'd spent 3 days imagining increasingly creative ways she could disappear? She smiled, warmer now, more genuine. "He's been unbearable for 2 years, you know, pining in that dramatic Sicilian way. The whole family's been waiting for him to finally make a move." She grabbed her bag, kissing Donato's cheek in a familial gesture that looked nothing like the professional intimacy she displayed at the office. "I'll leave you two to talk. Try not to kill each other." And then she was gone, and I was alone with Donato and his family home, in a salon that probably hosted important family meetings and strategic discussions about territory and power. "She really is your cousin," I said, still processing. "Second cousin. Her mother is my father's cousin." He moved to a sideboard, pouring 2 glasses of wine. "The Grecos handle our interests in Naples. Valentina specializes in psychological operations, reading people, understanding their vulnerabilities." Psychological operations. I took the wine he offered. "You brought in a specialist to manipulate me. I brought in family to help me understand what you felt." He gestured toward the balcony doors. "Come, I want to show you something." The balcony overlooked Palermo, the city spreading out below us in a tapestry of lights as dusk deepened into night. The air was warm, carrying the scent of jasmine and the sea. Storm clouds were gathering on the horizon, dark and heavy with promise. "This is what I see every night," Donato said quietly, standing beside me at the stone railing. "This city, this empire my family built. Everything I'm responsible for, everyone who depends on me to be strong, controlled, unshakable." I said nothing, just sipped my wine and waited. "And then you walked into my office 2 years ago," he continued, "and suddenly none of it mattered as much as making sure you looked at me. Really looked at me, not at the Don or the boss or the criminal, but at me." Thunder rumbled in the distance. The first drops of rain began to fall, fat and warm. "We should go inside," I said. "Not yet." He turned to face me, rain beginning to darken his hair, spot his shirt. "I need to know something, Cora. I need to know if what happened this week was just you reacting to tests and manipulation, or if there's something real underneath." The rain was falling harder now, soaking through my blouse, but I didn't move. "You want truth? After all the games, the surveillance, the staged jealousy, now you want truth?" "Yes." His voice was raw. "Because I can't keep doing this if it's one-sided. I can't keep wanting you this much if you're just caught up in the intensity of it all." Something in me snapped. All the restraint I'd maintained, all the careful control, just broke apart under the weight of the rain and his words and 2 years of denying what I'd felt from the beginning. "You want to know the truth?" I set my wine glass down on the railing with enough force that I was surprised it didn't shatter. "The truth is I've been terrified of you since day one. Not because you're dangerous, though you are. Not because you're a criminal, though you are that too. But because I knew. I knew from the first time you looked at me that if I let myself feel anything, it would consume me completely." The rain was a curtain now, drenching us both, but neither of us moved. "The truth is I built those rules to protect myself from you," I continued, my voice rising over the sound of rain hammering against stone. "Every boundary, every professional distance, every careful wall I constructed was because I was already falling and I couldn't let myself admit it. Do you know how hard it's been? Working 10 feet away from you every day, watching you command entire rooms with a word, seeing the way you care for your family, even while running an empire? Do you know what it cost me to stay neutral, to be just your secretary, when all I wanted was to be yours?" His eyes were dark, intense, fixed on my face like I was the only thing in the world. And then Alessandro sent those stupid flowers. I said, my hands fisting at my sides. And you lost control. You finally let me see past that perfect mask to the man underneath. The man who could be jealous and possessive and desperate. And I hated it, Donato. I hated that you gave me what I've been craving for 2 years. This proof that you felt something too. And then you tested me. You brought in Valentina and made me feel exactly what you'd felt. And I wanted to hurt you for it. Cora, he started, but I wasn't finished. But here's the real truth. I said, stepping closer to him, close enough that I had to tilt my head back to maintain eye contact, rain streaming down both our faces. The real truth is that I've been in love with you for longer than I want to admit. That every late night in the office, every moment of perfect synchronization, every time you trusted me with something important, I felt a little more. And watching Valentina touch you, smile at you, exist in your space like she belonged there, it didn't just make me jealous. It made me realize that I can't do this anymore. I can't pretend that I'm just your secretary, that I don't care who you smile at, or who touches you, or who you let into your life. Thunder cracked directly overhead, and the rain became a deluge. I love you, I said, and the words felt like jumping off a cliff. I love you, and it terrifies me because your world is dangerous and complicated, and I could lose everything. But I can't keep pretending I don't feel it. So yes, there's something real underneath all the tests and games. There's me, completely in love with you, and that's the truth you wanted. The silence that followed was broken only by rain and my own racing heartbeat. Donato stood perfectly still, water streaming down his face, his shirt plastered his chest, his dark eyes blazing with something that made my breath catch. Then he moved, his hands framing my face, his mouth crashing into mine with a desperation that matched my confession. This wasn't like the careful kisses in the archives, wasn't calculated or controlled. This was raw and real. 2 years of denied want finally unleashed. When he pulled back, both of us breathing hard, he rested his forehead against mine. Say it again. I love you. I whispered. Again. I love you, Donato Lombardo. Louder this time, more certain. I love you too, he said against my lips. I've loved you since you refused to be intimidated by me. Since you reorganized my entire filing system without asking permission. Since you started anticipating what I needed before I knew I needed it. I love you, and I'm going to spend the rest of my life making sure you never doubt it. He kissed me again, slower this time, thorough and claiming. The rain poured down around us, soaking us completely, but neither of us cared. We were finally telling the truth, finally admitting what had been building between us for 2 years. When we finally went inside, dripping water across expensive marble floors, I was shivering. Donato disappeared and returned with soft towels and one of his shirts. As I dried my hair, watching him move through his home with easy familiarity, I realized this was real. This wasn't a test, or a game, or a moment of weakness. This was us, finally honest about what we felt. Stay tonight, he said quietly, his hand gentle on my cheek. Not for anything except being together. I want to wake up and know you're here, that this is real. I should have said no. Should have maintained some boundary, some last shred of professional distance. But I'd already jumped off the cliff. Might as well enjoy the fall. Okay, I said, and watched relief flood his features. That night, I slept in Donato Lombardo's bed, his arms wrapped around me, his heartbeat steady beneath my ear. And for the first time in 2 years, I didn't dream about marble floors or broken rules, or the price of survival. I just dreamed of him. I woke to sunlight streaming through unfamiliar windows and Donato's arm draped across my waist, his breath warm against my shoulder. For a moment, I just lay there, absorbing the reality of where I was and what had changed. Then I felt his lips brush the back of my neck, and I knew he was awake. Good morning, he murmured, his voice rough with sleep. Good morning. I turned in his arms to face him, and a look in his eyes made my heart skip. This was Donato without his armor, his hair mussed, his jaw shadowed with stubble, his gaze soft in a way the world never saw. I need to tell you something, he said, his fingers tracing lazy patterns on my hip. Before we go back to the office, before we face everyone, what happens between these walls, in private, that's ours. But out there, in public, things will need to stay professional. For your safety. Reality crept back in with his words. You mean we can't tell anyone? Not yet. His expression turned serious. Being known as important to me makes you a target, Cora. My enemies, the rival families, anyone who wants leverage against me. They'll see you as a weakness to exploit. Until I can ensure you're protected, until I can make the right alliances and send the right messages, we need to maintain appearances. I understood. Of course I understood. But understanding didn't stop the small ache in my chest. So at work, I'm still just your secretary. At work, you're the woman I trust more than anyone in my organization. He kissed me softly. But yes, we'll maintain professional distance. No one can know, not yet. Can you do that? I've been doing it for 2 years, I said. I think I can manage. What I didn't anticipate was how much harder it would be now that I knew what we were hiding. Monday morning, we arrived at the office separately. I came in at my usual 7:30, ponytail perfect, navy suit pressed. Donato arrived at 8:45, nodding to me with the same professional courtesy he'd always shown. Nothing in his demeanor suggested that he'd spent the weekend teaching me exactly how thoroughly he could worship every inch of my body. But I knew, and knowing made everything different. Every time he called me into his office for a legitimate meeting, I remembered his hands tangling in my hair while he kissed me against his bedroom wall. Every time he handed me a file, his fingers briefly touching mine, I thought about those same fingers trailing heat across my skin. Every carefully neutral, "Thank you, Miss Trentino," made me recall the way he'd groaned my name in the darkness of his bedroom. The contrast was intoxicating and torturous in equal measure. Tuesday afternoon, I was reviewing contracts at my desk when I heard raised voices from inside his office. A meeting with the Ricci family representatives had gone poorly, territorial disputes and old grudges surfacing. When the door finally opened and the 3 men stormed out, their faces flushed with anger, I knew without looking that Donato would be in a mood. I gave him 10 minutes before buzzing the intercom. "Mr. Lombardo, would you like me to reschedule your afternoon appointments? Come in here, please." His voice was clipped, controlled fury barely leashed. I entered his office to find him standing at the windows, his back to me, hands clasped behind him so tightly his knuckles were white. The set of his shoulders screamed tension. "Close the door," he said without turning. I did, and the second the lock clicked, his entire posture changed. He turned, and the carefully controlled Don was gone, replaced by a man who looked exhausted and frustrated, and in need of something he couldn't ask for in public. "Come here," he said softly. I went to him, and he pulled me into his arms, burying his face in my neck, just breathing. We stood like that for long minutes, him holding me like I was the only thing keeping him grounded, me running my fingers through his hair in the soothing gesture I'd learned he loved. "They're testing me," he finally said against my skin, "pushing boundaries to see if I'll react with the violence they expect. But I can't. Not right now. Not with expansion negotiations ongoing. So I sit there and I take their disrespect, and I smile, and I negotiate when all I want is to remind them why my family has held this territory for 3 generations. You're being strategic," I said. "That takes more strength than violence." He pulled back to look at me, his hands framing my face. "How do you always know what I need to hear?" 2 years of practice. I smiled. "Plus, I'm desperately in love with you, so I'm motivated to get it right." He kissed me then, slow and thorough, pouring all his frustration and need into it. When his phone buzzed with his next appointment, we broke apart reluctantly. I fixed his tie, smoothed his hair, watched him reconstruct his armor piece by piece. "Thank you," he said, his voice back to that controlled tone. "Anytime, Mr. Lombardo." I moved toward the door, unlocking it. "Your 3 o'clock is here." And just like that, we were professional again. Secretary and boss. Nothing to see. Wednesday evening, he texted me to meet him at the villa instead of going home. I found him in the courtyard, jacket discarded, sleeves rolled up, a glass of wine waiting for me on the stone table. "Rough day?" I asked, settling beside him. "I fired someone." He stared at his wine. "Someone I've known since childhood." He was skimming profits, lying in my face. I gave him a chance to confess, to make it right. He lied again. "What did you do?" "What I had to do." His jaw tightened. "In my world, mercy is seen as weakness. So I made an example, and I hated every second of it." I took his hand, lacing our fingers together. "You're not a monster for doing what your position requires." "Or not." He looked at me, and I saw the weight of his choices in his eyes. This is my life, Cora. This darkness, these impossible decisions. Are you sure this is what you want? I'm sure I want you, I said firmly. All of you, including the parts that have to make terrible choices. You don't get to protect me from reality by pushing me away. He pulled me into his lap, holding me close. You're too good for this world. I'm exactly good enough for you, I corrected. And you're stuck with me. By Thursday, we'd fallen into a rhythm. Professional distance at work, with only the briefest private moments stolen in his office. Passionate nights at the villa, where he could drop the weight of being the Don and just be Donato, the man who loved me with an intensity that still took my breath away. Friday afternoon, his mother came to the office. Signora Lombardo was a force of nature, elegant and terrifying in equal measure. She swept into the reception area in designer black, her sharp eyes missing nothing. Buongiorno, Signora Lombardo, I said, standing immediately. Mr. Lombardo is expecting you. Miss Trentino. She studied me with an intensity that made me feel transparent. You look well. Different somehow. My heart stuttered. Thank you, Signora. Shall I let Mr. Lombardo know you're here? In a moment. She moved closer, and I fought the urge to step back. My son has been different this week. Calmer. More focused. Less of that restless energy he's carried for so long. I'm glad to hear he's well. I managed. Her eyes narrowed slightly. Tell me, Miss Trentino, do you think my son is happy? It was a trap. It had to be. I think Mr. Lombardo is dedicated to his family and his responsibilities, Signora. That's not what I asked. She smiled, and it was knowing. But I see I've made you uncomfortable. Forgive an old woman's curiosity. You may tell Donato I'm here. As she swept past me in his office, I caught her murmuring something in Italian that sounded suspiciously like, finally. That night, at the villa, I told Donato about the encounter. She knows, he said simply. My mother knows everything. She's probably known since the moment you arrived at the office Monday morning with that specific glow that comes from being thoroughly loved. Donato, my face flamed. He laughed, pulling me close. Don't worry. If she disapproved, you'd know. The fact that she said nothing means she approves. My mother has been waiting for me to settle down with someone who could match me. And she thinks I match you. Cara mia. He kissed my forehead. You exceed me in every way that matters. That first week taught me what our life would be like. The careful balance of public and private. The mask we wore for the world and the truth we share behind closed doors. The weight of his responsibilities and the sanctuary we created for each other. It was complicated and dangerous and required constant vigilance. But when I woke in his arms each morning, when I saw the peace in his face that only appeared in private, when he held me like I was precious and essential in his, I knew it was worth every complication. Because I wasn't just his secretary anymore. I wasn't just the woman who loved him. I was becoming something more. His partner, his confidant, his queen in a kingdom built on blood and power. And I was finally completely his. 3 weeks later, I stood in front of the mirror in Donato's bedroom, barely recognizing myself. The gown was emerald silk, fitted to my body like it had been painted on, the back dipping low enough to make my breath catch. Diamonds glittered at my throat and ears, on loan from the Lombardo family vault. Each stone probably worth more than my yearly salary. You're devastating, Donato said from the doorway, and when I turned, the look in his eyes made heat pool in my stomach. He was in a tuxedo, perfectly tailored, his hairstyle back, every inch the powerful Don. But his gaze on me was pure hunger. This feels dangerous, I said, touching the diamonds nervously. Everyone will notice me. That's the point. He crossed to me, his hands settling on my waist. Tonight is the Heritage Gala. Every important family in Sicily will be there. And tonight, I'm going to make it very clear that you're under my protection. I thought we were keeping this quiet. We were. His expression turned serious. But there's been chatter. Questions about why I've been different, distracted. My enemies are starting to circle, looking for weaknesses. Better to claim you publicly, on my terms, in front of witnesses, than let them discover you on their own. My stomach tightened with anxiety. This is really happening. Only if you want it to. He cupped my face gently. Say the word, and we go back to how things were. Professional distance, secrets, safety. I thought about the past 3 weeks. The nights in his arms, the quiet moments of vulnerability, the way he looked at me like I was his entire world. Going back was impossible. I want this, I said firmly. I want you. I'm ready. The gala was held at the Palazzo Marchetti, a 16th century estate on the cliffs overlooking the sea. As we arrived, photographers' flashes exploded like lightning, capturing Sicily's most powerful don with a woman on his arm for the first time in years. Inside, the palazzo was transformed into something from a dream. Crystal chandeliers cast prismatic light across marble floors. Champagne flowed. Women in designer gowns mingled with men in expensive suits, every conversation laden with subtext and strategy. Donato kept me close, his hand to the small of my back, introducing me to family heads and business associates with a careful formality that still somehow conveyed ownership. This is Miss Cora Trentino, my executive assistant and trusted advisor. The looks I received ranged from curiosity to calculation to barely concealed hostility. I'd stepped into their world officially, and not everyone was pleased about it. 2 hours in, Donato was pulled into a conversation with the Castellano family head, something about shipping routes and territorial agreements. "Stay where I can see you," he murmured to me. "Don't go anywhere alone." I nodded, watching him move away with reluctance. Marco, the security guard who'd always been kind to me, materialized at my elbow. "Signorina Trentino, would you like some champagne?" "Please." I accepted the glass gratefully, sipping as I surveyed the room. That's when I saw him, a man across the ballroom, watching me with unsettling intensity. He was perhaps 40, handsome in a cold way, with slick back hair and a smile that didn't reach his eyes. When our gazes met, he lifted his glass in a mock salute that made my skin crawl. "Marco," I said quietly. "Who is that man?" "The one staring." Marco followed my gaze, and his expression darkened. "That's Lorenzo Valli. They call him the Viper. He controls territories in the south, always been hostile to the Lombardo family. You should stay away from him, Signorina." But Valli was already moving toward us, cutting through the crowd with purpose. "Miss Trentino," he said, his Italian accent thick and oily. "Finally, I meet the woman who's captured our Don's attention. I've heard so much about you." "Signor Valli." I kept my voice neutral, professional. "I'm afraid you have me at a disadvantage." "Do I?" His smile widened. "I think not. I think you know exactly who I am and what I represent. Tell me, does Donato know you're standing here unguarded? That seems careless of him." "I'm hardly unguarded." Marco had moved closer, his hand resting on something beneath his jacket. "One soldier." Valli's eyes gleamed. "Against how many of mine, do you think?" The ballroom suddenly felt too large, too exposed. I looked for Donato, found him still deep in conversation across the room, unaware of the threat materializing beside me. "What do you want?" I asked quietly. "Nothing you can give me here." Valli leaned closer, his voice dropping. "But I wanted you to know that Donato's protection isn't as absolute as he'd like you to believe. That there are those of us who see his feelings for you as exactly what they are, a weakness. And weaknesses, Miss Trentino, are meant to be exploited." Before I could respond, he melted back into the crowd, disappearing among the guests. "I need to tell Donato," I said to Marco, but he was already speaking urgently into his radio. The next hour passed in a blur of anxiety. Donato returned to my side, his expression thunderous when Marco briefed him on Valli's approach. He kept me even closer after that, barely letting me out of his sight, but the gala continued around us, all glittering surfaces hiding dark intentions. It was when I excused myself to the restroom that everything went wrong. The hallway was quieter, away from the ballroom's noise. 2 female guards stood at the entrance to the ladies' room, and I felt safe enough. Inside, I touched on my lipstick, trying to calm my racing heart. When I emerged, the guards were gone. My instincts screamed danger, but before I could react, strong hands grabbed me from behind. A cloth pressed against my mouth and nose, chemical sweet and suffocating. I tried to scream, to fight, but my limbs went heavy, consciousness slipping. The last thing I heard before darkness claimed me was a familiar oily voice. "She's secure. Move her to the service exit. The Viper sends his regards to Don Lombardo." I woke to the sound of gunfire. My head pounded. My mouth tasted like chemicals, but I was alive. I was in a vehicle, moving fast, and through my blurred vision, I could see men in the front seats arguing in rapid Italian. Then the vehicle lurched violently. More gunfire. Closer now. Shouting. The screech of tires. The door beside me was ripped open, and Donato was there, his tuxedo torn, blood on his shirt, a gun in his hand and murder in his eyes. Behind him, I could see bodies on the ground as soldiers engaged in a firefight with Valley's men. Cora, he breathed, and the relief in his voice nearly broke me. He cut through the zip ties, binding my wrists with a knife, lifting me out of the vehicle. Can you walk? I think so. My legs were unsteady, but I forced them to hold me. Stay behind me. He positioned himself between me and the remaining attackers, returning fire with cold precision. Marco appeared, covering our retreat as we moved toward the line of Lombardo vehicles. I saw Valley then, trying to escape in the chaos. Donato saw him too, and his expression turned absolutely lethal. He moved with frightening speed, cutting off Valley's escape, his gun pressed to the other man's temple. You touched what's mine, Donato said, his voice deadly quiet despite the chaos around us. You try to take her. Give me one reason I shouldn't end you right now. The families will never accept her, Valley spat. She's a weakness, Lombardo. Everyone sees it. Then everyone will learn what happens when they threaten my weakness. Donato's finger tightened on the trigger. Donato, I called, my voice shaky but clear. Not like this. Not in front of everyone. He looked at me, and I saw him warring with himself. The man who wanted revenge, and the man who wanted to be better for me. Finally, he lowered the gun, but his knee came up into Valley's stomach, dropping him. You're done in Sicily, Donato said coldly. Your territories, your operations, everything. I'll dismantle your entire organization. And if you ever breathe her name again, I'll forget I showed mercy tonight. As his soldiers dragged Valley away, Donato returned to me, his hands gentle despite the violence still echoing around us. Are you hurt? No. Scared but not hurt. I was shaking now, the adrenaline wearing off. He pulled me against his chest, holding me so tightly I could barely breathe. I almost lost you. When I realized you were gone, that they'd taken you right from under my protection, his voice broke. I can't lose you, Cora. I can't. You didn't. I whispered against his chest. You found me. You saved me. I should never have put you in danger. He pulled back to look at me, and I saw genuine anguish in his eyes. This is my world. This violence, these threats. Maybe you were right to build those walls. Maybe I'm being selfish keeping you in this. Stop. I cupped his face, forcing him to meet my eyes. I chose this. I chose you, knowing exactly what your world looks like. What happened tonight doesn't change that. You were kidnapped, drugged, almost, but I wasn't. I kissed him, tasting blood and fear and relief. Because you came for me. Because you'll always come for me. That's what matters. Around us, his soldiers were securing the scene. The gala's guests, likely still inside the palazzo, sheltered from the violence that had erupted in the service area. This would have consequences, political and otherwise. But right now, holding Donato while he shook with the aftermath of almost losing me, none of that mattered. Take me home, I whispered. Take me to the villa and hold me until I stopped shaking. He nodded, lifting me in his arms despite my protest that I could walk. As we moved toward his car, I looked back at the palazzo, at the beautiful facade hiding such darkness. This was my life now. Danger and violence and threats that could materialize in an instant. But it was also Donato, his absolute devotion, the lengths he'd go to protect me. And somehow, that was enough. The meeting was called for Sunday afternoon, 3 days after the gala attack. Every family head, every capo, every significant member of the Lombardo syndicate had been summoned to the main estate, the sprawling compound that had housed the family for 4 generations. I wasn't supposed to be there. Traditional syndicate meetings were family business, off limits to outsiders. But Donato had insisted, his hand firm on the small of my back as we entered the grand hall together. They need to see you with me, he'd said that morning. They need to understand that what happened at the gala was an attack on the family itself. The hall was already filled when we arrived, conversations dying as we entered. I'd met many of these men before in passing, professional encounters that never revealed the full weight of their power. Seeing them all together, the combined force of Sicily's oldest crime syndicate, was overwhelming. Donato's mother sat in chair of honor near the front, her expression unreadable. When she caught my eye, she gave the smallest nod, and I felt a fraction of my anxiety ease. "Thank you for coming," Donato began, his voice carrying through the hall with natural authority. 3 nights ago, Lorenzo Valli attempted to kidnap Signorina Cora Trentino from the Heritage Gala. This was not a random act of violence. It was a calculated strike designed to weaken me, to test our family's strength. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Valli believed that my feelings for Miss Trentino made me vulnerable. Donato continued, his hand finding mine, lacing our fingers together in front of everyone. He was wrong. My feelings for her make me more dangerous than I've ever been. Because now I have something worth protecting, something worth fighting for beyond territory and profit. An older man near the front, one of the family's senior advisors, spoke up. "With respect, Don Lombardo, bringing a woman into your inner circle does make you vulnerable. Tonight's events prove that. Tonight's events prove that anyone who threatens what's mine will face immediate and total retaliation." Donato corrected, his voice hardening. "In the past 3 days, I've systematically dismantled Valli's operations. His shipping contracts have been seized. His political protections have evaporated. His soldiers have been offered positions in our organization or exile. The Viper has been defanged." He paused, letting that sink in. "But more importantly, I've realized something. For years, I've built this empire with discipline and control, always maintaining distance, never allowing personal feelings to influence business decisions. And it's worked. We've grown stronger, more influential, more feared." His thumb stroked across my knuckles, a gesture so tender it contrasted sharply with the cold strategy in his words. "But an empire without heart is just a machine," he said. "And I've been operating like a machine for too long. Miss Trentino changed that. She reminded me that strength doesn't mean isolation. That having something to protect makes you fight harder, not weaker. That love, real love, is the most powerful motivation there is." He turned to face me fully, and my breath caught at the intensity in his eyes. "Cora Trentino, you've been my secretary for 2 years, my lover for a month, and the woman I've loved since the day you refused to be intimidated by me." His hand reached into his jacket pocket, pulling out a small velvet box. "I'm asking you now, in front of my family, in front of everyone who matters in my world, to be my wife." The box opened, revealing a ring that made several women in the crowd gasp. An emerald surrounded by diamonds, set in platinum, the kind of piece that belonged in museums. "This ring belonged to my grandmother," he said softly. "She told me before she died to give it to a woman who could match me in strength and stubbornness. A woman who would stand beside me, not behind me. A woman who would call me on my mistakes and love me anyway." Tears blur my vision. "Donato, I know this life is dangerous," he continued. "I know what I'm asking you to accept, but I'm also promising you my protection, my devotion, my entire heart for as long as we both live. Marry me, Cora. Be my wife, my partner, the queen of everything I've built." The hall was absolutely silent, hundreds of eyes on us, waiting. I thought about the woman I'd been 2 years ago, walking into this world with my rules and my walls, determined to survive without getting involved. I thought about every carefully constructed boundary Donato had systematically demolished. I thought about the kidnapping, the violence, the very real dangers of loving a man like him. And then I thought about waking up in his arms, about the way he looked at me like I was his entire world, about the future we could build together if I was brave enough to claim it. "Yes," I said, my voice clear despite the tears. "Yes, I'll marry you." The ring slid onto my finger, a perfect fit, and then Donato was kissing me in front of the entire syndicate, claiming me publicly and irrevocably as his. The hall erupted. Some cheered, some looked concerned, but no one could deny the power of what had just happened. The Don had chosen his queen, and she'd chosen him back. 6 months later, we married on the cliffs overlooking the Mediterranean, in a ceremony that blended traditional Sicilian customs with touches that were purely ours. I wore a gown of ivory silk that made Donato's eyes darken with want when he saw me. He wore a tuxedo and his grandmother's watch, a link to the legacy we were continuing. The guest list included family, both legitimate and otherwise, business associates, and even a few politicians who owed the Lombardo family favors. Alessandro came too, having forgiven me for the chaos his flowers had caused, bringing his new girlfriend and toasting our happiness with genuine warmth. When Donato said his vows, his voice was steady, but his eyes were bright with emotion. I promise to love you fiercely, protect you relentlessly, and spend every day proving that you made the right choice when you agreed to be mine. My own vows were simpler. I promise to stand beside you, challenge you, support you, and love you through everything this life brings. You're mine, Donato Lombardo, and I'm never letting you go. The kiss that sealed our marriage was met with cheers and the popping of champagne corks, the celebration lasting long into the night. 18 months after that, I stood in the nursery of the villa, holding our son Leo in my arms while Donato looked over my shoulder, his finger caught in the baby's tiny fist. "He has your eyes," I whispered, marveling at the perfect little human we'd created. "He has your stubborn chin," Donato countered, pressing a kiss to my temple. "He's going to be trouble. He's your son. Of course he'll be trouble." Leo yawned, his dark eyes fluttering closed, and I felt a wave of fierce protectiveness wash over me. This tiny person, this perfect combination of Donato and me, represented everything we'd fought for. A future built on more than violence and territory. A legacy of love alongside power. "Do you ever regret it?" Donato asked quietly. "Giving up your simple life for this complicated one?" I turned to look at him, this man who'd shattered all my carefully laid plans and given me everything I didn't know I needed. Not for a single second. Even with the danger, the complications, the fact that our son will grow up in this world. Especially because of that, I shifted Leo slightly, leaning into Donato's warmth. Because he'll grow up with a father who's strong enough to protect him and gentle enough to love him. With a mother who knows how to navigate dangerous waters. With a family legacy that's being transformed from the inside out, one generation at a time. Donato's arms came around both of us, holding his entire world in one embrace. "I love you," he murmured against my hair. "God, Cora, I love you so much it terrifies me sometimes." "Good," I said, smiling against his chest. "Fear means you understand what you have to lose. But I'm not going anywhere, Donato. We're forever, remember? You and me and this beautiful boy. That's the real Lombardo legacy." Through the nursery window, Palermo spread out below us in golden afternoon light, the city we protected and ruled in equal measure. The empire Donato had built was stronger now, not despite his love for me, but because of it. His enemies had learned that attacking his family brought swift and total retribution. His allies had seen that the Don who could love fiercely could also lead with vision and heart. And I had learned that the rules I'd made to survive were nothing compared to the freedom of loving without reservation, of trusting someone completely, of building a life that was complicated and dangerous and absolutely perfect. The jealous boss who'd crushed a whiskey glass over flowers had become a devoted husband who brought me jasmine from the villa gardens every morning. The man who'd manipulated me with stage jealousy had become a father who sang Sicilian lullabies to our son. The Don who'd terrified half of Sicily had become mine, completely and irrevocably mine. And as I stood there, surrounded by love and protection and the future we'd claimed together, I thought about the flowers that had started it all. Alessandro's innocent gesture that had finally pushed Donato past his breaking point, forcing us both to admit what we'd been denying for 2 years. "You know," I said, smiling at the memory, "we should probably send Alessandro a thank you gift. For the flowers." Donato laughed, the sound rich and warm. "The flowers that nearly made me commit murder." "The flowers that gave us this," I corrected, gesturing to our sleeping son, to the life we built. "Then yes," he agreed, pressing a kiss to my forehead. "We owe him everything." Leo stirred in my arms, making a small sound of contentment, and I felt my heart swell with more love than I'd known was possible. This was the real story, I realized. Not the jealous confrontation or the dangerous games or even the dramatic rescue. Those were just the beginning. The real story was this: two people who'd been too afraid to want each other, learning to love without limits. A family built on blood and choice in equal measure. A legacy transformed by the simple, revolutionary act of letting someone in. And it all started with a man who couldn't control his jealousy, a secretary who wouldn't back down, and a bouquet of flowers that changed everything. In the end, that was enough. More than enough. It was everything.
Thank you for watching this story to the end. If you enjoyed this story, you will surely love the next one. It's as crazier and more intriguing as you can ever imagine. So do check it out. Click on the image showing on your screen right now to watch the next one.